The pervasive scent of stale coffee and desperation clung to Alara Vance's tiny, cluttered apartment, a constant companion to her late-night studies. Moonlight, fractured by the grimy windowpane, illuminated stacks of dog-eared textbooks precariously balanced on every surface, a leaning tower of theoretical physics, advanced mathematics, and classical economics. The glow from her single, dim desk lamp cast long, dancing shadows, turning her cramped living space into a cavern of knowledge. Most evenings she subsisted on instant noodles and the bitter brew, her mind a ceaseless current of equations and concepts, even as her stomach grumbled a quiet protest. In the sprawling, echoing halls of the university, Alara was largely a ghost. She attended lectures, usually gravitating towards the back rows, her slight figure camouflaged amidst the sea of students. Her silence was often mistaken for disengagement, her intense gaze interpreted as boredom. But beneath her unassuming exterior, a brilliant mind whirred, driven not by the pursuit of accolades or a gleaming career, but by an insatiable, almost primal curiosity. She sought understanding for understanding's sake, a quiet, solitary pursuit that often felt at odds with the competitive, sometimes cutthroat academic environment. Recognition was a secondary concern. The truth, however elusive, was her primary obsession. One biting autumn afternoon, after a particularly grueling quantum mechanics lecture, Alara noticed a small cluster of her peers huddled around a whiteboard in the common area. They were struggling, their brows furrowed, over a complex derivation that Professor Finch had breezed through, leaving many bewildered. Whispers of frustration rippled through the group. Alara, despite her own pressing deadlines and the gnawing ache of hunger, paused. She saw the despair in their eyes, the fear of falling behind. Without a word, she picked up a marker, her movements precise and unhesitating. She quietly corrected a subtle error in one of the initial equations, then, with elegant strokes, completed the derivation, adding a few concise notes that illuminated the professor's obscure leaps in logic. She didn't seek thanks. A quiet nod from a relieved classmate was enough. She simply slipped away, her inherent generosity of spirit and deep understanding of the subject matter demonstrated in that small, anonymous act. This was Alara's quiet, save-the-cat moment, a testament to her intrinsic goodness that fostered immediate reader empathy. Alara's intellectual approach was, to put it openly, unorthodox. While other students furiously scribbled down lecture notes, hers were a peculiar blend of intricate equations and abstract, almost artistic, diagrams. She would sketch swirling patterns that mirrored the flow of water in a fountain or the delicate branching of a leaf, then overlay them with differential equations, seeing complex theoretical concepts reflected in the simple beauty of nature. Her professors, if they noticed, would occasionally remark on her distracting doodles, urging her to focus on proper academic notation. She had a peculiar habit of pausing mid-thought, her gaze drifting to a distant window, lost in some unseen connection between the mundane and the profound. She wasn't daydreaming. She was observing, her mind forging links that others missed. This unusual method of processing information, a subtle hint at her groundbreaking potential and unconventional insights, sowed the seeds of mystery, laying the groundwork for the later revelation of her truly revolutionary ideas. The quiet hum of Alara's academic life, a delicate symphony of self-directed study and silent observation, was about to be shattered by a discordant note of public humiliation. The instrument of this disruption was none other than Professor Alistair Finch, the esteemed, almost revered, head of the theoretical physics department. Finch was a titan in his field, a man whose groundbreaking unified field theory, a complex framework attempting to reconcile all fundamental forces of nature, had been the cornerstone of his academic empire for decades. He exuded an air of impenetrable brilliance, his lectures delivered with an almost theatrical certainty, his gaze often sweeping over the lecture hall as if daring anyone to question his pronouncements. The catalyst for Alara's forced emergence came during the highly anticipated annual departmental colloquium, an event where students were encouraged to present preliminary research findings. Alara, despite her usual reluctance for the spotlight, had been quietly preparing a short presentation on a novel approach to addressing a specific anomaly within quantum entanglement, an area where Finch's theory seemed to show a slight, almost imperceptible, wobble. She had framed it as an alternative perspective, hoping to invite discussion rather than confrontation. As Alara concluded her brief, understated presentation, Professor Finch, seated in the front row, cleared his throat, a sound that seemed to reverberate through the hushed auditorium. His gaze, usually aloof, fixed on Alara with an unnerving intensity. "Ms. Vance," he began, his voice dripping with condescension, "your alternative perspective is, shall we say, quaint. But frankly, it demonstrates a fundamental lack of understanding of the established principles of quantum mechanics, particularly as they relate to my own unified field theory." He paused, allowing his words to hang in the air, his lips curling into a faint, superior smile. "Your approach," he continued, gesturing dismissively towards her simple whiteboard diagrams, "is akin to trying to solve a quadratic equation with finger paints. Ambitious, perhaps, but ultimately futile, and, dare I say, amateurish." The snickers from some of the other graduate students, particularly those who vied for Finch's favor, felt like physical blows. This public shaming, specifically tailored to highlight her perceived intellectual deficiency in front of her peers and the entire department, profoundly impacted Alara's academic standing and personal dignity, a sting she felt deep in her soul. Alara's initial reaction was a familiar mix of shame and acute embarrassment. Her cheeks flushed, and her hands, clutching her notes, trembled almost imperceptibly. Her first instinct was to retreat, to shrink back into the anonymity of the lecture hall's back rows, to bury herself in her textbooks, and never again venture an original thought. The very ground beneath her feet seemed to sway, her carefully constructed world of quiet intellectual pursuit crumbling under the weight of Finch's scathing dismissal. However, as Finch continued to elaborate on his unassailable theory, his voice booming with unshakable conviction, a different emotion began to stir within Alara. Indignation, not just for herself, but for the truth. She knew, with an almost visceral certainty, that her perspective, however unconventional, held a deeper, more elegant truth than Finch's increasingly convoluted explanations. His harsh, absolute dismissal, laced with an intellectual arrogance that bordered on contempt, ignited a spark of fierce intellectual conviction within her. It awakened a dormant intellectual courage, a desperate, quiet need to validate her unique insights, not for ego, but for the sake of the truth itself. The quiet, analytical part of her mind, usually so serene, now pulsed with a nascent, righteous fire. Professor Finch, perhaps sensing the subtle shift in Alara's posture, or simply reveling in his perceived victory, took a further, more damaging action. 2 days after the colloquium, a university-wide email announced a special, closed-door faculty seminar, led by Professor Finch, titled, "The Irrefutable Completeness of the Unified Field Theory, Dispelling Fringe Interpretations." The implied target was clear. Simultaneously, Alara received a terse email informing her that her application for the prestigious Finch Research Grant, a crucial lifeline for her unfunded research, had been unsuccessful due to a perceived divergence from established foundational principles. It was a death knell to her academic prospects, a clear message that her unconventional thinking had blacklisted her. This concrete, undeniable act of intellectual suppression forced Alara to a point of no return. She stared at the rejection email, her vision blurring not from tears, but from a cold, unwavering resolve. She could not simply continue her quiet research. Finch had made sure of that. She had to actively confront the established paradigm, and by extension, the professor himself, knowing that her entire academic future, her ability to pursue the truth, and the very validity of her intellectual pursuit were now irrevocably at stake. Her intellectual vindication, she realized, was no longer a quiet aspiration. It was an unavoidable battle. She would either prove her truth or be condemned to academic obscurity. The sting of Professor Finch's public dismissal and the chilling finality of the grant rejection fueled a quiet, desperate fire within Alara. Academic obscurity loomed, a vast, silent void threatening to swallow her intellectual curiosity whole. But within that despair, a defiant resolve solidified. She would not be silenced. She would not abandon the truth she felt simmering beneath the surface of established theories. Driven by an urgency that bypassed sleep and sustenance, Ilara retreated deeper into her research. She meticulously refined her unconventional theory, the one Finch had so casually derided. Her focus narrowed to a seemingly intractable problem that Professor Finch himself had publicly declared unsolvable within his existing framework: the precise nature of dark matter's interaction with gravitational fields, a conundrum that introduced subtle, unexplainable anomalies into cosmological models. Finch's unified field theory offered a complex, elegant, but ultimately incomplete explanation, leaving a persistent, nagging statistical deviation. In the late hours of the university library, amidst the hushed reverence of countless tomes, Ilara traced the anomaly. She spread out her peculiar notes, a tapestry of intricate equations interwoven with those abstract, almost artistic diagrams that mirrored natural patterns. She recalled her habit of observing the intricate dance of light on water, the swirling eddies in a stream, the delicate fractal branching of trees. What if the universe, in its grand complexity, operated not on the rigid linear principles Finch championed, but on a more fluid, interconnected, almost organic logic? What if the key lay not in forced simplicity, but in embracing an inherent, elegant complexity? A profound moment of quiet breakthrough struck her one pre-dawn morning. As she sketched the branching patterns of a snowflake on a scrap of paper, her hand unconsciously drawing parallels to subatomic particle interactions, a crucial, elegant solution clicked into place. The missing variable in Finch's equations, the anomaly in the cosmic data, wasn't a flaw in the universe. It was an oversight in his model, a fundamental misunderstanding of interdimensional resonance. Her theory proposed that dark matter wasn't merely interacting gravitationally, but was subtly resonating across minute, curled-up extra dimensions, creating a ripple effect that mimicked gravitational influence but defied direct detection by current instruments. This interdimensional resonance, she realized, was what caused the statistical deviation. She wasn't showing off or deliberately trying to disprove Finch. She was simply following the truth wherever it led, compelled by intellectual honesty. This was the unwilling revelation of her groundbreaking insight, a quiet, profound discovery made in the solitude of her relentless pursuit. Only one person inadvertently witnessed a glimpse of this breakthrough. Dr. Evelyn Reed, a recently retired astrophysicist known for her open-mindedness and a quiet disdain for academic dogma, was a rare late-night fixture in the library, poring over ancient texts on obscure astronomical phenomena. She had often seen Ilara, head bowed over her papers, an aura of intense concentration about her. On this particular morning, as Ilara furiously scribbled equations and diagrams, her usual quiet intensity had escalated into a palpable, almost frantic excitement. Dr. Reed, drawn by the unusual energy, quietly approached Ilara's table. She didn't speak, but her presence was felt. Ilara, looking up, her eyes wide with the thrill of discovery, instinctively pushed a partially completed diagram towards Dr. Reed. It was a complex illustration of multidimensional wave patterns, annotated with what appeared to be modified string theory equations. Dr. Reed, with a seasoned eye, recognized the audacious theoretical leaps being made. She picked up the page, her brow furrowed in concentration, then widened in dawning comprehension. "Interdimensional resonance," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "And how this impacts dark matter detection?" Ilara, initially hesitant, was subtly coaxed into a brief, probing discussion, her words tumbling out in a rush of explanation. Dr. Reed listened, utterly astonished, sensing a profound, paradigm-shifting insight that stretched the boundaries of current physics. She knew, with a certainty that thrilled her, that she was witnessing the birth of something truly revolutionary. Professor Finch, meanwhile, remained utterly oblivious, basking in the perceived safety of his established empire, convinced his theories were unimpeachable. Professor Finch, indeed, was preparing to reinforce his intellectual dominance. Unaware of the quiet revolution brewing in the library, and perhaps fueled by a lingering insecurity regarding Ilara's quiet intensity, he actively doubled down on his established theories. He announced a new, highly anticipated paper, co-authored with his most senior protégés, titled "The Final Word on Dark Matter, Reaffirming the Unified Field." It was set to be published in the most prestigious academic journal, presented with great fanfare at the upcoming annual University Research Symposium. He also scheduled a series of high-profile public lectures, each one designed to solidify his legacy and dismiss any fringe interpretations. During a departmental meeting, he even made a thinly veiled comment about the dangers of amateurish conjectures clouding the clarity of established science, his gaze pointedly lingering on the empty chair usually occupied by Alara. His actions further solidified his role as the Type A villain antagonist, driven by intellectual pride and a profound, almost pathological fear of being disproven. He was actively seeking to maintain his dominance and discredit any challenge to his life's work, even before fully comprehending its nature. His dismissal of Alara had escalated into a public, professional campaign against her intellectual integrity, setting the stage for a dramatic, inevitable clash. Professor Finch's relentless campaign to solidify his unified field theory and preemptively quash any dissenting voices reached its crescendo with the announcement of the annual University Research Symposium. This wasn't merely a conference. It was Finch's personal intellectual dominion, a grand stage where he annually reaffirmed his status as a titan of theoretical physics. This year, it was specifically billed as the platform for the unveiling of his definitive new paper, The Final Word on Dark Matter, Reaffirming the Unified Field. The symposium's main event, a primetime televised lecture by Finch himself, was precisely the symbolic arena Alara knew she had to enter. It was the heart of Finch's academic empire, the very stage where her ideas had been dismissed, and now where they must rise. The tension in the air within the university's hallowed halls was thick, a mixture of anticipation for Finch's pronouncements and a subtle, unspoken curiosity about the fringe interpretations he had so vehemently denounced. The symposium hall buzzed with an air of intellectual gravity. Esteemed academics from around the globe mingled, their hushed conversations punctuated by the clink of silverware from the pre-lecture reception. Professor Finch, impeccably dressed and radiating an aura of unshakable confidence, greeted colleagues, accepting their deferential nods and praise with practiced ease. He moved through the crowd like a king among his subjects, oblivious to the quiet storm brewing. In this formidable arena, Alara stood largely alone. Dr. Evelyn Reed, her helper, was indeed present, sitting discreetly in the third row, her gaze fixed on Alara with a mixture of quiet encouragement and palpable anxiety. A few junior academics, emboldened by whispers of Alara's unconventional brilliance, offered hesitant smiles, but none dared to openly defy Finch's looming presence. The intellectual battle was solely Alara's. She carried the weight of her months of solitary research, the intricate equations, the unconventional diagrams, all distilled into a single, undeniable truth. She had to present her complex, groundbreaking theory against the overwhelming weight of Professor Finch's established reputation, his polished rhetoric, and the ingrained skepticism of the academic elite. Her only weapons were her raw intellectual brilliance, her meticulous research, and her unwavering conviction in her truth. She clutched a slim folder containing not a voluminous paper, but a series of elegantly simple proofs, her notes for what would be the most important presentation of her life. The time pressure was excruciating, a relentless drumbeat in Alara's ears. Professor Finch was already at the podium, basking in the introductory applause. He began his lecture, his voice resonating with authority, building his argument with the practiced ease of decades of unchallenged dominance. He methodically laid out the irrefutable completeness of his unified field theory, meticulously explaining how it accounted for every known phenomenon, even hinting that the final missing piece of the dark matter puzzle was just beyond the reach of current technology, implying a solution that would ultimately align with his framework. He was about to deliver the climactic portion of his lecture, a definitive statement that would further cement his theory and implicitly, irrevocably, discredit any dissenting voice, including Alara's nascent work. He felt his heart pound against his ribs, a frantic rhythm mirroring the ticking clock. Finch gestured to a complex diagram on the massive screen behind him, a visual representation of his final word on dark matter, solidifying his legacy. This was it. Alara had a narrow, self-imposed window, mere minutes, to interject, to present her findings, to challenge the professor's core premise before his authority becomes insurmountable. The audacity of her impending challenge to such an entrenched figure, a man who had shaped the very field she now sought to redefine, was dizzying. The tension in the hall mounted with every eloquent word Finch uttered. The dramatic irony was palpable, almost suffocating. The hundreds of brilliant minds in the audience, the esteemed colleagues, the eager students, and Professor Finch himself were utterly oblivious to the seismic intellectual shift that was about to occur. They were listening to the swan song of an old paradigm, completely unaware that a quiet student in the back of the room held the key to a new, revolutionary understanding, one that would dismantle the very foundations of Finch's life's work. Ilara took a deep breath, clutching her folder, her gaze fixed on the imposing figure at the podium. Her moment, the moment of truth, was upon her. Professor Finch's voice, resonant with the authority of decades, filled the grand auditorium. On the immense screen behind him, complex equations and elegant diagrams representing his unified field theory glowed, seemingly unassailable. He concluded his segment on dark matter with a flourish, declaring it the final frontier, solvable only within the comprehensive framework we have painstakingly constructed. A wave of murmurs, then polite applause, rippled through the esteemed audience. This was the crescendo of his intellectual empire, and for a moment, the weight of it threatened to crush Ilara. The air crackled with the triumph of established dogma. This was the bated breath moment for Ilara. Everything seemed to go wrong, her vital truth seemingly drowned out by the noise and the pervasive acceptance of Finch's pronouncements. Just as Professor Finch turned to acknowledge the applause, his hand already reaching for a glass of water, Ilara acted. Her voice, initially a mere tremor, gained an unexpected clarity, cutting through the polite murmurs. "Professor Finch," she called out, rising from her seat in the third row, a slim folder clutched in her hand. "With all due respect, your framework has a fundamental oversight." A collective gasp swept through the auditorium. Finch, startled, spun around, his polished smile instantly replaced by a scowl. "Ms. Vance," he sneered, his voice now laced with undisguised contempt, "I believe we settled your oversights weeks ago. This is hardly the time for juvenile interruptions. Sit down." Several faculty members turned, their faces a mixture of embarrassment and annoyance, urging Ilara to comply with their disapproving glares. One even hissed, "Don't you dare ruin this, Ilara." But Ilara stood her ground, her eyes fixed on Finch, a quiet fire burning within them. "The dark matter anomaly isn't a frontier to be solved within your theory, Professor. It's a symptom of your theory's inherent incompleteness." She stepped forward towards the stage, her movements deliberate. Finch, incandescent with rage, moved to block her. "Security!" he bellowed, his voice echoing through the hall. "Remove this disruptive element." Just as a burly university security guard began to move from the back, Ilara reached the edge of the stage. With a swift, almost practiced motion, she detached a marker from the nearby whiteboard, ignoring Finch's furious gestures. She turned to the vast, empty section of the screen that Finch had used for his complex diagrams. "Your theory," Ilara stated, her voice clear and resonant, "presumes a universe of 4 dimensions. But what if there are more? What if dark matter interacts with them?" With dazzling speed and precision, she began to write. Elegant, fluid equations flowed from her hand, unlike anything Finch had ever presented. Interspersed with the mathematics were those subtle, abstract diagrams, swirling patterns, interconnected nodes, representing interdimensional resonance and the unseen ripple effects she had theorized. Each stroke was deliberate, each line a precise hammer blow against the professor's flawed logic. She filled the screen not with complexity, but with an astonishing, almost frightening simplicity that laid bare the fundamental oversight at the heart of Finch's convoluted but ultimately incorrect theories. Then came the bated breath moment. Professor Finch, initially scoffing, his arms crossed, suddenly froze. His eyes, fixed on her rapidly filling blackboard, widened imperceptibly. He saw the beauty, the terrifying simplicity of her elegant proof. He saw the crucial variable he had always dismissed as negligible, now placed at the very heart of her solution. He opened his mouth to retort, but no sound came out. The security guard, halfway to the stage, paused, his brow furrowed, caught by the sheer audacity of Alara's impromptu lecture. Just as the silence stretched to a breaking point, just as the academic elite in the audience began to scoff, their faces etched with smug dismissal, Alara turned from the board. She pointed to a single, small, almost hidden line in one of Finch's original published equations displayed prominently in the program booklet, a line that had always been footnoted as statistically insignificant. "This," Alara stated, her voice resonating with quiet triumph, "this insignificant variable you've dismissed for decades, Professor, isn't noise. It's the signature of the fifth dimension. It's the proof. Your entire life's work. It simply accounts for one less dimension than the universe truly operates on." The effect was instantaneous and devastating. A collective gasp swept through the hall, followed by an electrifying silence. Dr. Thorne, the esteemed car historian who had seen Alara's work, now stood at the back of the auditorium, his face a mask of utter astonishment. A quiet "my God" escaping his lips. A renowned physicist from MIT, Professor Anya Sharma, who had been an ardent admirer of Finch's work, rose slowly from her seat, her eyes fixed on Alara's equations, a look of dawning comprehension, then profound intellectual awe spreading across her face. Professor Finch's face contorted. The arrogance drained from him, leaving behind a pallor of utter intellectual devastation. His eyes, usually sharp and dismissive, glazed over. He stared at the blackboard, then at his own printed paper, then back at Alara, his empire crumbling before his very eyes. The applause, when it came, was hesitant at first. A few claps from the back, then a rising tide, swelling into a thunderous standing ovation. It was not merely for Alara, but for the profound truth she had unveiled. Professor Finch, once the undisputed titan, sagged, his public unraveling complete. The crowd's transition from skepticism to overwhelming astonishment, then to a roaring recognition of Alara's brilliance, confirmed her intellectual victory as a profound public vindication of truth, courage, and the triumph of groundbreaking insight over entrenched dogma. The thunderous applause for Alara, still ringing in the vast auditorium, was a death knell for Professor Finch's once unassailable career. He stood on stage, a broken man amidst the wreckage of his life's work, the triumphant roar of Alara's intellectual revolution deafening him. The cameras, once focused on his pronouncements, now swiveled to capture the quiet student who had dismantled his empire with a few elegant strokes of chalk. Professor Finch's downfall was swift and absolute. Within days, the academic community, initially stunned, reacted with a furious reevaluation. His seminal papers, the very bedrock of his reputation, were retracted from prestigious journals. Universities began to revoke honorary degrees and rescind speaking invitations. The National Science Foundation launched an ethical investigation into his long-standing dismissal of dissenting theories and his apparent suppression of nascent research that challenged his views. His once busty office was emptied, his nameplate removed from the department door. He vanished from public life, an intellectual pariah, losing all that he had valued, his status, his accolades, his carefully constructed legacy, to the undeniable truth Alara had unveiled. His pride, the very engine of his ambition, had consumed him, leaving only professional ruin in its wake. For Alara, the world shifted from dim lamplight to blinding brilliance. The university, eager to align itself with the new intellectual paradigm, offered her a prestigious research fellowship, one of the largest ever granted to a student, and an accelerated professorship in a newly established interdimensional physics department. She was no longer burdened by financial worries or the suffocating constraints of academic marginalization. Her cramped apartment was exchanged for a spacious, sun-filled office, its walls soon adorned not with textbooks, but with groundbreaking new diagrams. She was given complete intellectual freedom, the resources to pursue her theories to their fullest, and the autonomy to build a team of like-minded, open-minded researchers. Her former struggles transformed into a position of profound influence and intellectual leadership. A few weeks after the symposium, Alara sat with Dr. Evelyn Reed, her helper, in the quiet solitude of the university garden. The late afternoon sun dappled through the leaves, casting shifting patterns on the stone bench. "You know, Alara," Dr. Reed began, a warm smile on her face. "When I saw your equations that night in the library, I knew it was special. But even I didn't fully grasp the magnitude of what you'd found. It's a paradigm shift, a revolution." Alara traced a pattern on the condensation of her water glass. "It was always there, Dr. Reed. The numbers, the patterns in nature, Finch's own insignificant variables. He just couldn't see it because it didn't fit his predefined world. His ego blinded him. And your courage," Dr. Reed added, her voice soft but firm. "To stand up there, alone, against decades of entrenched thought, that's as profound as your genius. Many brilliant minds get silenced because they lack that courage." Their reflective dialogue, though brief, encapsulated the intricate journey they had shared, the unexpected twists of intellectual discovery, and the profound lessons learned about the nature of truth, the dangers of academic dogma, and the bravery it takes to challenge established norms. "It makes me wonder," Dr. Reed mused, "how many other insignificant variables are waiting to be understood? How many other truths are being missed because we're too set in our ways?" Alara looked out at the tranquil garden, a subtle shift in her posture reflecting her journey from a quiet, overlooked student to a recognized intellectual leader. "The universe is always whispering its secrets, Dr. Reed," she replied, a thoughtful glint in her eyes. "We just have to be willing to listen, even when the whispers challenge everything we think we know." Her words, simple yet profound, resonated with the quiet strength she had discovered within herself, marking not just the resolution of a conflict, but the dawn of a new era of open inquiry and boundless intellectual exploration. 5 years later, the scent of fresh brewed coffee, rather than stale, filled Alara Vance's spacious, sun-drenched study. Gone were the precarious stacks of dog-eared textbooks. In their place, meticulously organized shelves held volumes of her own published works, interspersed with prestigious awards and citations. Her once cluttered apartment was a distant memory, replaced by a workspace that hummed with quiet intellectual energy. She still worked late into the night, but now it was by choice, driven by the same insatiable curiosity, yet supported by a team of brilliant, open-minded students, eager to explore the new frontiers of physics she had unveiled. Alara, once a solitary shadow in the back of lecture halls, was now a world-renowned professor, her groundbreaking interdimensional resonance theory forming the cornerstone of a new scientific paradigm. Alara was deeply committed to paying it forward. She understood the quiet despair of being overlooked, the burning frustration of having truth dismissed. She founded the Vance Initiative for Unconventional Research, an annual fund that provided grants and mentorship to graduate students pursuing radical, potentially paradigm-shifting theories that might otherwise be stifled by traditional academic structures. She ensured these aspiring minds had the financial freedom and intellectual support she had so desperately lacked. Her mentorship program, the Catalysts, actively sought out students from underrepresented backgrounds, fostering an environment where daring questions and unorthodox approaches were celebrated, not suppressed. She frequently gave public lectures, not just on her theories, but on the importance of intellectual honesty, courage, and the necessity of questioning established dogma, her soft voice carrying a powerful message that resonated far beyond the confines of academia. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Alara stood before a packed lecture hall, the very same one where Professor Finch had once shamed her. But today, the air was vibrant with eager anticipation, not stifling orthodoxy. She was explaining a particularly complex aspect of her interdimensional resonance theory, her fingers gliding across a vast interactive display, sketching an elegant, swirling equation. It was the very equation that years ago had shattered Professor Finch's world, revealing his foundational oversight. She paused, turning to her students, her eyes alight with the same quiet passion that had driven her through countless lonely nights. "This equation," she said, gesturing to the glowing symbols behind her, "was once considered heresy. It challenged everything we thought we knew about the universe. But the universe doesn't care about our preconceptions. It simply is." She smiled, a profound, knowing smile. "Our task, as scientists, as thinkers, isn't to force the universe into our theories, but to listen to its whispers, to follow the truth wherever it leads, no matter how uncomfortable or revolutionary it may seem. The equation, now widely accepted and taught as fundamental physics, was not merely a formula. It was a symbol of the profound shift she had brought about, a beacon of truth, illuminating a new path for scientific understanding. Alara stood at the nexus of a thriving intellectual community, no longer confined to a back row, but a guiding light. She had not only disproven a famous professor's life's work, but, in doing so, had opened up an entirely new dimension of human understanding, proving that even the most quiet and unassuming voices can echo with the loudest truths, perpetually seeking the next uncharted frontier of knowledge. If this story stirred your heart, if it reminds you that courage can alter destinies, and that light always finds a path even in the deepest darkness, please leave a comment. Share this story with those who need inspiration. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss our upcoming stories.